For centuries, the land of modern-day Israel was conquered and ruled by various groups, including the Persians, Greeks, Romans, Arabs, and others. Throughout centuries of Jewish diaspora, the dream of returning to this ancestral homeland, known as Zionism, remained a powerful and unifying force. On May 14, 1948, Jewish Agency Chairman, David Ben-Gurion, proclaimed the State of Israel, establishing the first Jewish state in 2,000 years. In this video we will delve into the various circumstances surrounding the establishment of Israel as a nation. The British Mandate. After World War II, many Jews who had survived the Holocaust were left without a home. The Zionist movement, which had been established in the late 19th century by Jews in the Russian Empire, called for the establishment of a territorial Jewish state after enduring persecution. The Balfour Declaration of 1917, issued by the British government during World War I, further fueled this aspiration. It expressed support for a national home for the Jewish people in Palestine. When World War I ended in 1918 with an Allied victory, the 400-year Ottoman Empire rule ended, Palestine came under the control of the Allied powers. In 1920, the League of Nations granted Britain the mandate to govern Palestine, currently modern-day Israel, Palestine, and Jordan. The mandate was officially confirmed in 1922, and the British mandate over Palestine lasted until May 14, 1948. Jewish migration. Jews had been migrating to Palestine since the early 1880s and the emergence of the Zionist movement. Between 1882 and 1903, about 35,000 Jews relocated to Palestine. Zionist doctrine sought to establish a national homeland for the Jewish people in Palestine. Massive numbers of Jews immigrated to the ancient Holy Land and built settlements. By the end of 1931, 174,600 Jews were living in Palestine, which was 17% of the population. After World War II and the Holocaust, the Zionist cause gained momentum. The international community, moved by the atrocities of the Holocaust, supported the establishment of a Jewish state. Great Britain, at the time in charge of the Palestine territories, established a government's policy to limit Jewish immigration to Palestine due to Arab opposition to it. Between August 1946 and May 1948, the British government intercepted more than 50,000 Holocaust survivors seeking to resettle in Palestine and interned these survivors in detention camps established on the Mediterranean island of Cyprus. The detention camps on Cyprus were overcrowded and unsanitary. Many survivors suffered from malnutrition and disease while living there. Despite the risks involved, many Jews chose to immigrate illegally to Palestine through Aliyah Bet, because they believed that they had a right to settle in their ancestral homeland. Aliyah Bet was an illegal immigration route used by Jews seeking to resettle in Palestine, between 1920 and 1948. It involved smuggling Holocaust survivors into Palestine on ships that were often intercepted by British authorities. The most famous of these ships was Exodus 1947, which carried more than 4,500 Holocaust survivors from France to Palestine, but was intercepted by British authorities. Its passengers were sent back to Europe. The establishment of Israel in May 1948 marked the end of Aliyah Bet. The Arab Revolt. From the early 1900s to 1947s, Palestine underwent profound political, demographic, and social transformations that laid the groundwork for the establishment of the State of Israel and the enduring Israeli-Arab conflict. The British Mandate period from 1920 to 1948 was marked by Jewish immigration, Arab resistance, and growing tensions between the two communities. In Palestine, the mandate required Britain to put into effect the Balfour Declaration's national home for the Jewish people, alongside the Palestinian Arabs, who compose the vast majority of the local population. In the late 1930s, Arab discontent erupted into the Great Arab Revolt against British rule. The 1936 to 1939 Arab Revolt in Palestine, also known as the Great Revolt or the Great Palestinian Revolt, was a nationalist uprising by Palestinian Arabs in Palestine against the British administration of the Palestine Mandate. The revolt demanded Arab independence and the end of the policy of open-ended Jewish immigration and land purchases, with the stated goal of establishing a Jewish national home. It began with a general strike by Palestinian Arabs, protesting against Jewish immigration and land purchases. The Arab Higher Committee led the revolt, which was supported by local rebel factions and volunteers from the Arab world. The strike quickly turned violent, with attacks on Jewish settlements and British forces. The British responded with force, deploying troops to suppress the revolt. They also established special night squads to carry out counterinsurgency operations against Arab rebels. These squads were composed of Jewish volunteers who were trained by British forces. The revolt ended with a ceasefire agreement between Arab leaders and British authorities in 1939. The British government issued the White Paper of 1939. This policy severely restricted Jewish immigration and land purchases, a move that was seen as appeasing Arab sentiment. The Arab Revolt had far-reaching consequences for Palestine and the Middle East. It marked a turning point in Palestinian nationalism and led to increased support for Arab independence throughout the region. It also led to increased support for Zionism among Jews in Palestine and around the world. The Peel Commission. The Peel Commission, officially known as the Palestine Royal Commission, was a British investigative committee established in 1936 to examine the escalating tensions between Jewish and Arab communities in Mandatory Palestine. The Peel Commission was tasked with assessing the situation and proposing recommendations for resolving the conflict. Its primary objectives were to investigate the causes of the unrest, evaluate the validity of the British mandate, and suggest potential solutions. On July 7, 1937, the Commission published a report that recommended the partition of Palestine into 3 separate zones, Jewish and Arab states, with Jerusalem under international administration. The Commission also suggested the transfer of populations between the proposed Jewish and Arab states to ensure demographic homogeneity within each entity. Finally, the report proposed an economic union between the proposed Jewish and Arab states to facilitate cooperation and shared resources. The British cabinet endorsed the Partition Plan in principle, but requested more information. The Arab Higher Committee opposed the idea of a Jewish state and called for an independent state of Palestine, with protection of all legitimate Jewish and other minority rights and safeguarding of reasonable British interests. They also demanded cessation of all Jewish immigration and land purchase. They argued that the creation of a Jewish state and lack of independent Palestine was a betrayal of the word given by Britain. The Zionist leadership was bitterly divided over the plan. In a resolution adopted at the 1937 Zionist Congress, the delegates rejected the specific partition plan. Yet the principle of partition is generally thought to have been accepted or not rejected outright. While the Peel Commission's recommendations were not directly implemented, they contributed to the ongoing discourse surrounding the future of Palestine and influenced subsequent discussions on partition and statehood. The White Paper. The White Paper of 1939 was a policy paper issued by the British government, led by Neville Chamberlain, in response to the 1936–1939 Arab Revolt in Palestine. This policy severely restricted Jewish immigration and land purchases, a move that was seen as appeasing Arab sentiment. The policy limited Jewish immigration to 75,000 for 5 years and ruled that further immigration would then be determined by the Arab majority. Jews were restricted from buying Arab land in all but 5% of the mandate. The proposal did not meet the political demands proposed by Arab representatives during the London Conference and was officially rejected by the representatives of Palestine Arab parties, who were acting under the influence of Haj Amin Effendi al-Husseini, but the more moderate Arab opinion that was represented by the National Defense Party was prepared to accept the White Paper. Jewish insurgency. Between 1944 and 1948, Jewish underground groups carried out a successful paramilitary campaign against British rule in Mandatory Palestine. The tensions between the Zionist underground and the British mandatory authorities rose from 1938 and intensified with the publication of the White Paper of 1939. The Haganah, meaning defense in Hebrew, was the largest of the Jewish underground militias during the British Mandate period. The Haganah focused on self-defense and protecting Jewish communities from attacks. However, as tensions grew with the British and Arab communities, it became increasingly involved in offensive actions against both. The Haganah later became the core of the Israel Defense Forces, IDF, which was established after the declaration of the State of Israel in 1948. Irgun. Also known as Etzel, the Irgun was a more militant and nationalist Jewish paramilitary group that operated during the 1930s and 1940s. The Irgun carried out a number of high-profile attacks against British targets and infrastructure, as well as against Arab communities. Its most infamous action was the bombing of the King David Hotel in Jerusalem in 1946, which was the headquarters of the British mandatory authorities. The explosion killed 91 people, including British, Jewish, and Arab personnel. Lehi. also known as the Stern Gang after its leader Avraham Stern, was a smaller and more radical faction within the Jewish insurgency. It sought to force the British out of Palestine by any means necessary, including terrorism. It was responsible for some of the most extreme actions against both British forces and Arab civilians, carrying out assassinations and attacks against British personnel and infrastructure. On November 6, 1944, Lord Moyna, the British Minister of State for the Middle East, was assassinated by members of Lehi in Cairo, Egypt. The group viewed him as an obstacle to their goals. These acts of terrorism were part of a broader campaign by Jewish paramilitary groups to pressure the British to withdraw from Palestine and support the establishment of a Jewish state. While these actions were viewed by some as acts of resistance against colonial rule, they also caused significant loss of life and were condemned by many in the international community. The United Nations Partition Plan. The British tried to work out an agreement acceptable to both Arabs and Jews, but failed to do so. Prior efforts, like the Peel Commission report and the British White Paper, had failed to gain support from both sides. In February 1947, Britain announced its intent to terminate the Mandate for Palestine, referring the matter of the future of Palestine to the United Nations. The UN established a special commission on Palestine, named the United Nations Special Committee on Palestine, UNSCP, in 1947. Comprising representatives from 11 member states, UNSCP was tasked with evaluating the situation in Palestine and proposing a solution that would satisfy both Jewish and Arab aspirations. After thorough investigation and deliberation, UNSCP released its report on September 3, 1947. The report recommended the partition of Palestine into separate Jewish and Arab states, with Jerusalem under international administration. The proposed plan sought to allocate approximately 56% of the land to the Jewish state and 43% to the Arab state, with a small enclave under international supervision, encompassing Jerusalem and its surrounding areas. The plan proposed the establishment of an economic union between the Jewish and Arab states, as well as the international zone of Jerusalem. This union was intended to foster cooperation in economic matters. The economic union was to include a common currency, a unified customs system, and shared resources such as water and energy. The partition plan included provisions safeguarding the rights of minorities in both the Jewish and Arab states. Citizens in each state were to automatically acquire citizenship of their respective state, and other residents would be granted rights and protection. Special committees were proposed to oversee the protection of religious and minority rights. The plan stipulated a transitional period during which the British Mandate for Palestine would gradually be terminated. During this time, both Jewish and Arab authorities were expected to cooperate with the UN and its appointed bodies for a smooth transition. The resolution called for the establishment of a special committee to ensure the timely implementation of the partition plan. On November 29, 1947, the UN General Assembly adopted the plan as Resolution 181, with a two-thirds majority vote, with 33 countries in favor, 13 against, and 10 abstentions. Both Jewish and Arab representatives, as well as various international actors, responded with a mix of acceptance, reservations, and strong opposition. Jewish leaders and organizations generally welcomed the partition plan as a historic validation of their aspirations. Figures such as David Ben-Gurion, who would later become Israel's first prime minister, saw it as an opportunity to establish a Jewish state in Palestine after centuries of exile and persecution. The Jewish Agency, representing the Jewish community in Palestine, formally accepted the plan, although with reservations about the proposed borders. In sharp contrast, Arab leaders and states rejected the partition plan vehemently. They viewed it as a gross injustice, arguing that it violated the rights of the Arab majority in Palestine. The Arab Higher Committee, representing Arab interests, vehemently opposed the plan and called for mass protests. Arab states, as a bloc, also rejected the proposal. They contended that it violated the principle of self-determination and was an infringement on the territorial integrity of Palestine. They vowed to resist its implementation by all means necessary. The Arab League, which was founded in 1945 and consisted of various Arab states, held a meeting in December 1947 in Cairo, to discuss the UNSCP recommendations. During this meeting, the Arab states expressed unanimous opposition to the partition plan. They adopted resolutions that supported a military solution to the conflict. They also pledged their support to the Palestinian Arabs and organized a force of 3,000 volunteers. Civil War. A civil war began after the adoption of the United Nations Partition Plan for Palestine on November 29, 1947. Jamal Husseini, the Arab Higher Committee spokesman, had told the UN before the partition vote the Arabs would drench the soil of our beloved country with the last drop of our blood. As the Jewish community celebrations took place in the streets after the Partition Plan report was released, they were countered by protests by Arabs throughout the country, and after December 1, the Arab Higher Committee enacted a general strike that lasted 3 days. The AHC organized Arab irregular militias to oppose the Partition Plan. These militias conducted attacks on Jewish communities and British forces. From early 1948, the Palestinian Arabs took the offensive with help from volunteers from neighboring countries. Jewish communities faced massacres in places like Gush Etzion and Kfar Etzion. Arabs, some of them acting as suicide bombers, inflicted serious damage on Jewish targets, among them Jerusalem's Ben Yehuda Street from February 1948 onwards. A consequence of the violence was the decision by the Haganah Jewish paramilitary organization to use force to stop future attacks on Jews. The Irgun had conducted armed attacks aimed against the population of nearby Arab villages and a bombing campaign against Arab civilians. On December 12, Irgun militants placed a bomb at the Damascus Gate that killed 20 people. In early January, Haganah bombed the Semiramis Hotel. Despite the disadvantages in numbers, organization, and weapons, the Jews began to take the initiative in the weeks from April 1 until the Declaration of Independence on May 14. The Haganah captured several significant towns, including Tiberias and Haifa, and temporarily opened the road to Jerusalem. On April 9, 1948, the Irgun and Lehi jointly carried out an attack on the Palestinian Arab village of Deir Yassin, near Jerusalem. The attack resulted in the deaths of over 100 Arab villagers, including women, children, and elderly individuals. This event had a significant psychological impact on the Arab population and led to widespread fear and panic. The Haganah, the main Jewish paramilitary group, intensified its activities. It focused on defending Jewish communities, but also launched a series of offensives, known as Operation Nachshon, to secure vital supply routes and reinforce Jewish communities. On the evening of May 14, 1948, Jewish leaders and officials gathered at the Tel Aviv Museum. At approximately 4 p.m., David Ben-Gurion, the head of the Jewish Agency and soon-to-be Prime Minister of Israel, addressed the audience. In his address, Ben-Gurion declared the establishment of the State of Israel. His proclamation marked the culmination of decades of Zionist aspirations and Jewish efforts to re-establish a sovereign homeland. Ben-Gurion's proclamation commenced with a poignant affirmation of the historical, religious, and cultural ties of the Jewish people to the land of Israel. It was a resounding testament to the enduring legacy of Jewish civilization. The declaration went on to emphasize Israel's unwavering commitment to democracy, equality, and social justice. It pledged to uphold the rights and dignity of all citizens, irrespective of religion, race, or gender. In addition, the declaration called upon the international community to recognize the State of Israel and support its endeavors. It expressed Israel's desire for peace and cooperation with neighboring states. The fledgling state vigorously engaged in diplomatic efforts to secure international recognition. Over time, an increasing number of countries acknowledged Israel's sovereignty, thereby affirming its status as an independent nation. Israel applied for United Nations membership in May 1949 and was admitted as a member state on May 11, 1949. The declaration of the State of Israel marked the formal end of British rule in Palestine. The next day, on May 15, 1948, Egypt, Transjordan, Iraq, Syria, and Lebanon, along with volunteer forces from other Arab countries, launched an invasion to prevent the establishment of Israel. The Arab-Israeli War had begun. Arab armies from neighboring states invaded the territory allocated for the Jewish state by the UN Partition Plan. Egyptian forces entered Palestine from the south, with the aim of capturing the Negev desert. Transjordanian forces advanced from the east, focusing on areas allocated to the proposed Arab state. Syrian and Lebanese forces moved in from the north. The newly formed State of Israel fielded a relatively small, but determined, armed force composed of various paramilitary groups, including the Haganah, Irgun, and Lehi. In May 1948, the army did not have a single cannon or tank. Its air force consisted of 9 obsolete planes. Although the Haganah had 60,000 trained fighters, only 18,900 were fully mobilized, armed, and prepared for war. The city of Jerusalem became a major focal point of the conflict. Jordanian forces, alongside local Arab militias, laid siege to the Jewish quarter of the Old City of Jerusalem in late 1947. After multiple battles, the Jewish quarter ultimately fell to Jordanian forces in April 1948. Elite Jewish units, including the Palmach, engaged in a series of strategic actions. These included night operations, the use of explosives, and targeted attacks to weaken Arab forces. By late April and early May, Jewish forces managed to secure control over much of western Jerusalem, including areas around the western wall of the Old City. Jerusalem remained divided, with Jordanian forces in control of the eastern part, including the Old City, and Israeli forces holding the western part. Egyptian forces launched a major offensive towards Tel Aviv, but were repelled by Israeli forces. The Israeli defenders held out fiercely for days against vastly superior forces, and managed to buy valuable time for the IDF's Givati brigade to prepare and eventually stop the Egyptian drive on Tel Aviv. The conflict saw several attempts at negotiation with ceasefires and truces, often initiated by international pressure, but none of these proved to be long-lasting. On February 24, 1949, the first armistice agreement ending the war was signed between Israel and Egypt. An armistice line was agreed along the pre-war border with the exception that Egypt remained in control of the Gaza Strip. Lebanon, Jordan and Syria later signed armistice agreements. Iraq withdrew its forces from the region in March 1949. Israel emerged from the war with significantly expanded borders compared to those proposed in the UN Partition Plan. It controlled about 77% of the former mandatory Palestine, including areas designated for the Arab state. It gained control over significant portions of land, including the Galilee, the Negev, and parts of Jerusalem. The war resulted in a significant displacement of Palestinian Arab populations, with hundreds of thousands becoming refugees, a central issue in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. The creation of Israel symbolized the realization of the Zionist dream and the re-establishment of Jewish sovereignty after 2 millennia. It had profound implications for the Jewish diaspora and the geopolitical landscape of the Middle East. The establishment of the State of Israel remains a deeply significant event in Jewish history, representing the culmination of decades of aspiration, struggle, and resilience. It also remains a central issue in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and has far-reaching implications for the broader Middle East.